Okay, so this is going to be a screencast about the lesson plan templates and kind of how I view them or understand them, and then we're going to look at a sample of one that has already been done. So this is kind of the empty template, and I know I filled out a little bit at the top. So you start with your name, your lesson or title of the unit and lesson, how long the period is for, what grade and what subject. And something that I've kind of been looking at and trying to decide like how I'm going to go about doing this lesson plan is the central focus. And I feel like your central focus is basically what you want your students to be able to do by the end of the lesson, and that is also goes hand in hand with your um, language function, which is down here with language function and demands. So your language function could either be I want my students to be able to analyze, explain, clarify, inform, things like that, like action words that you would use in writing, even speaking or listening. And then the standards are also something that I think are very important when considering your language function, because your standard is basically has the language function in there. So most of the time you can use that language function within the standard as your language function throughout the unit. Instructional learning objectives are what students will be able to do as a result. So like I said, like that also goes hand in hand with your language function, what you want your students to be able to do by the end. Resources and materials are really important because obviously you're going to be using a lot of resources and materials when you're going through a lesson. Activating or acknowledging student prior knowledge. So I think that goes back to what they learned before the lesson or what you're going to introduce them to before actually diving into the lesson, so you can relate it back to their own personal lives, and that could activate their prior knowledge. Your transition, hook, or purpose for learning. I think those are also important. How are you going to start your class? How are you introducing what you're going to teach to your students and so forth? And then are you modeling? Are you giving guided instruction? Is there independent practice? Is there a closure to it? And I think the most important thing for me is independent practice. We want our students to be able to do these things on their own. So as much independent practice as possible that could be given in a lesson, I feel like is very important to me. So here's a sample of what it looks like when it's all filled out. And so this was a lesson on tangerine. It was a 45-minute class, English class for 7th graders. At the top, they did mention how many ELs and IEP students are in the classroom. And so here we have central focus, and there's those language function words: produce, research, cite, demonstrate. And then we have the standards, and you can see they also have words like research, explain, clear ideas, and relevant, like things like that will also be in the standards. So here, this is what I was talking about, instructional learning objectives. There should be some type of, they should be repeated, but you're explaining how they would do that within the lesson. And then your assessments for each. How are you going to test that they have actually done these things? Most of the assessments can be formal or informal, and it seems like here they have a lot of like formal assessments. And then we have the language function words again, additional language demands, which I didn't cover in the empty one, but it's basically the discourse. Like, how are you going to arrange your class? Are there going to be small groups? Are they going to be paired together? Are they going to be able to help each other do certain things? And I think that's also important, small groups, because most of the time the students don't want to just hear from the teacher, and small groups are really important because they help the students learn from each other. As I said, resources and materials, student prior knowledge. So students are interested, especially having finished the novel. And so if you're thinking about if they've already finished the novel, then you can tie things back in. So take different scenes and so forth to help them remember certain things. The hook and the purpose. As you can see, they kind of quoted out something as a hook. Italicized something as a hook, and it gets the students engaged right off the bat and makes them want to learn something. And yeah, so differentiation, you're going to talk about your IEPs, EL students, anything to really help students. You could be giving them more time. You could be allowing them to do certain things for homework. And I think those things are also important. Like if your student needs more time, you should allow them more time, because you don't want a student to ever feel rushed or like they weren't given the proper time to actually learn what was being covered. And I think that's really important as well. I think I never felt like I was rushed to learn something in class, but I definitely have friends that felt like they didn't have enough time looking at something to fully grasp it. Modeling is also very important, especially when dealing with technology, because we can't just assume that all students are proficient in technology, even though schools are becoming more guided towards using technology within the classroom. And yeah, I think this sample really points out like what they're doing if they have IEPs or 504s or English language learners. And I feel like that's something to really, really, really consider, because, you don't want any student to feel left out either, especially if they do have those IEPs or if there's a language gap. And yeah, that's what I've gathered from the lesson plans so far. Hopefully, as we continue to go through them or even do them ourselves, I start to understand it more. But yeah.